Year one under Rick Pitino was already a big success for St. John's, but year two, it's on track to be even better.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton. You're listening to the show at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. We are here for you every single day. Folks, want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. Free to join if you haven't done so yet. There's a link in the show notes. We're talking college hoops all the time out there. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, place your first $5 bet and you'll be guaranteed with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed whether you win or lose. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, we are continuing our team preview series. We've gotten to the point where I'm not going to read every team that we've already covered because there are quite a few of them, but you can go back. We got a playlist on YouTube if you're checking out the show on YouTube. We also got them all in the feeds there. We're talking about as many top 25 teams coming into the season as we can today. We're talking about their performance last year. We're talking about their offseason moves, their projected starting lineup, all sorts of good stuff. Today, we are going to be talking about the St. John's Red Storm, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Deivon, who hosts the Eye on the Storm podcast dedicated to all things St. John's. Who better to talk about this team as we enter the second year of the Rick Pitino era than Dave? Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Andy, what's going on? It's an exciting time of the year. We're 5 weeks away from some hoops. And I don't know about you, but I'm counting down the seconds. And Johnny's basketball is almost here. And the rest of the college basketball slates are just about to kick off. I'm chomping at the bits, man. I can't wait.
Most people who listen to the show probably know this, but I also cover the Gonzaga Bulldogs and their craziness in the kennel. Their kind of first event is this Saturday, and man, I am ready to get back to watching some hoops and excited to talk today about this St. John's team. And we'll kind of get into the last year in particular because this is a team that kind of just floundered in the Mike Anderson era. Like they weren't bad, but they certainly weren't really good either. Also, all told, they finished 68-56 in 4 years under Coach Anderson. Obviously, there was a bit of turmoil when he left the program, but the team goes out, they go get Rick Pitino, they bring him back to the Big East, an absolute legend in this conference from his days back at Providence, from his days at Louisville, of course, and in Kentucky in between. He's back in the Big East. And I guess my main question for you is the team was clearly better last year. They won 20 games, something they didn't do under Coach Anderson. They went 11-9 in the Big East. That's their best record. That was better than any record they had under Coach Anderson. And yet the team still didn't make the NCAA tournament. So it's kind of a two-part question for you, Dave. One, do you think they should have gotten one of the at-large bids into the NCAA tournament? And would you consider Pitino's first year a success despite not making the big dance?
So St. John's should have made the NCAA tournament. So should have Providence. So should have Seton Hall. Mm-hmm. Seton Hall won 13 games in the Big East last year. Nobody has ever missed the NCAA tournament, winning 13 games in the Big East before. They got absolutely snubbed, and then they went on to win the NIT.
Right.
Providence had a strong year as well. St. John's, I think they should have made it. They were the only team that gave UConn a run for their money from March on. And, yes, St. John's kind of dropped a few games. There were a few games that went the wrong way. They shouldn't have lost to Boston College. They shouldn't have lost to Michigan. So, yeah, those things hurt. They couldn't steal one at Creighton where they got screwed by the refs. There was a game against Marquette that they lost. There was a close games. They blew a 19-point lead against Seton Hall. There were things that really did go against them, but 11 wins in the Big East historically gets you in. And I think that they were snubbed. Unfortunately, listen, there's nothing you could do about it now. We were all pretty upset at the end of the year. And you just kind of have to go forward. Now, what they've done to kind of counteract that this year, I think they beefed up their non-conference schedule this year to try and, win and get some of those marquee wins that they didn't really have on the schedule last year. They beat Utah last year. That was a pretty good win, but Utah didn't play that well towards the end of the season, so that win got diminished. This year, with Baylor on the schedule, with Tennessee or Virginia on the schedule, with New Mexico on the schedule, with Kansas State on the schedule, they really have a chance to, and Georgia. I don't want to forget about Georgia, because Georgia, I think, is going to be a better team this year as well.
Yeah.
I think they're really setting themselves up for a chance to get those 3 to 4 non-conference wins that are going to hold a lot of weight for the rest of the season. But last year, not making the NCAAs certainly stung, because at the end of that year, we thought, we had the back pages, and it was like, all right, we're going dancing. And that didn't happen. And for a team that hasn't won an NCAA tournament game in 25 years, it's going to be that it hurt. So time for that to change this season.
Yeah, well, and considering the amount of roster overhaul that happened last year, I mean, I think you expect that the season you're going to have some of those kind of moments where, like you said, you blow a lead in a game that you probably shouldn't, just because you have a bunch of guys who hadn't really played together. But it really felt like that team had started to get some of that momentum towards the end of the year. I mean, it was a roster that was effectively Joel Soriano and almost nobody else who was returning from the Anderson tenure, and obviously a ton of veteran talent that came in. And I thought that was smart of Pitino to bring in, if you're going to have a roster that doesn't have a lot of continuity, get a roster that's got a lot of experience, and you go out and you get guys like Jenkins and Dingle and Ledlam, and guys who'd been in college basketball for a long time, and you kind of saw how that allowed them to be able to gel a little bit faster maybe than a team full of freshmen might have, and kind of do the things that you're used to seeing from Rick Pitino teams. And it took them a little bit of time to get there, but I thought that team was rolling towards the end of the year. They seemed to have the momentum necessarily to, everybody's going to pick on Virginia for being just having a really abysmal performance in that play-in game. And like, oh, Seton Hall should have been there, or St. John should have been. I mean, you could pick just about any team, and they probably would have done better in that game than Virginia did. But it struck me as a little bit surprising that St. John's didn't get in. They could have helped themselves a little bit more, but the main thing that I just loved last year, I was just so happy to see Rick back in the Big East. I kind of alluded to it in the intro there, but like, this is somebody who's so synonymous with this conference from their pretty much their inception, really, to when they kind of hit it big and became this iconic, the original Big East, when they were so iconic. He was such a vital part of that. And to see him back at another school in this conference, it just feels like it's fun. And I think my question to you is just, what has that vibe been like? The vibe didn't feel great at St. John's prior to Pitino's arrival. And Rick has a tendency to, for better or worse, he's going to be in the news. You're going to be talking about him like that. He's very good at commanding attention and bringing attention to his program. Did it feel like it kind of reinvigorated a fan base there for the Johnnies?
Yeah, no question about it. And it started obviously almost a week or two before he was hired. We heard he was the favorite to get the job from day one. We kind of knew it was going to be happening behind the scenes, been hearing about it, for a long time. It does happen. And then where you really started to feel it was at Big East Media Day. There was just a different energy in the room. It was incredible. And there was so much attention on him. And then, he is a quote machine. So, you just start with preseason stuff, and then you get quotes about lateral quickness all season. Then you get quotes that, the loss to Creighton. He says that he wants to kill himself and jump in the cold and die of frostbite. It was one thing after another, but he's a legendary coach. You saw a different style of basketball. You saw a coach hold his players accountable. You saw a coach that wasn't afraid to hurt some feelings in order to get his point across. It was a very different atmosphere. And for the fan base, they were very rejuvenated. And that's kind of carried over, because now St. John's has a new athletic director, Ed Cole. He was just announced on September 17th, somebody that has ties to St. John's, somebody that has ties to Mike Rapoli, as well as Rick Pitino. Like, there's a lot of unity and a trinity right now, as well as Father Shanley within St. John's and the top administration. It seems like everything is sort of starting to come together where it hasn't in a very long time. There's a lot of excitement for St. John's right now. There's a lot of excitement last year. But there was disappointment towards the end of the year. And, you talked about how the roster was constructed and, Joel Soriano was the main piece that came back. But, Joel Soriano started the season really well. And then there was just so much on Danis Jenkins' shoulders. And, Danis had a phenomenal season. But at the end of the year, Jordan Dingle, it took a long time for him to get going. At Joel Soriano's season kind of dovetailed at the end, and Simeon Wilcher started to get going late, but it just, there wasn't enough help there. And I think that was part of the issues as well. Like you said, it took a little time to gel. It took too long. And I think that they're trying to avoid that this year. Seems like they're following a very similar roster build situation where they got older players. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the portal additions that were phenomenal and just top notch. But they also got 4 really important players to come back, and that's a huge storyline in the transfer portal era as well. So there is a lot of excitement. I think there's even more excitement this year than there was last year. I think Rick Pitino knows how much pressure is on. He doesn't like to lose. Not making the NCAA tournament is foreign for him. This is a man who's been coaching for about 40 years and has missed the tournament only a handful of times. So it is, the excitement is on another level. Can't wait for Big East Media Days coming up in a few weeks. St. John's Media Days coming up in a few weeks. Their preseason game against Rutgers is coming up. That's going to be really exciting. And the buzz is really starting to build.
You touched on it a little bit, and I definitely want to get into. It wasn't a full rebuild this offseason the way that it was the year prior. Like you said, he's got some key guys coming back, but also some of the arguably the best transfer portal class in the entire country. And I think that's where I really want to go here is if this class is the best and how these players are going to fit into Pitino's system. And we're going to get into all of that in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about today's sponsor, Roy. It's time to highlight our Roy Player of the Week. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. This week, we've selected Caleb Lohner as our Player of the Week because he's a former Hooper. We get to talk about a former college basketball player who scored a touchdown for Utah against Arizona. He, in fact, has 3 receptions this season for the Utes. All of them have gone for touchdowns. That is as efficient as you can possibly be as a tight end at the college level. So I'm giving $100 to Caleb Lohner on Roy. If you were impressed as we were with his performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. Just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in just $10, it adds up fast for Lohner. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Caleb Lohner and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring to the program. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton here, still hanging out with Dave Barov, talking all things St. John's basketball here. We talked about last season, the first of the Rick Pitino era for the Johnnies. Now I want to talk about the offseason because St. John's had an incredible offseason. It is universally considered one of the best in college basketball. It's not like we're surprised that Rick Pitino can go out and get talented players. He has an incredible history of recruiting successfully. Now, there was some question of like, okay, the transfer portal is pretty new for everybody. Is this something that a coach like Pitino can adjust to? No problems there. He went out and goes, just in the backcourt alone, goes out and gets Kadary Richmond from Seton Hall, Deivon Smith from Utah, 2 incredibly talented guards, 2 bigger guards, versatile guards who can score, they can distribute the basketball, they can rebound. They both have very similar kind of profiles. And I mean, I think Richmond is arguably the best player who is in the transfer portal. I know some people are going to try to point to Coleman Hawkins or some other guys who are in that conversation, AJ Storr from Wisconsin going to Kansas. But to me, Kadary Richmond's ability to impact the game on both sides of the ball was top notch. And adding him and Deivon Smith, who averaged like 15, 6, and 6 or something like that at Utah. I mean, you just get 2 incredibly dynamic playmaking guards for Rick Pitino, who has to replace Jenkins and Dingle. And for me, these feel like 2 players who really not only are incredibly talented, but they really fit what Pitino likes to do offensively.
The offseason was, it got off to a little bit of a slow start again. Last year, it took a little while for Rick Pitino to get his groove, and it took about 56 days for him to fill out the the roster last year. And this offseason kind of got a little slower because they started they changed their approach this year. They really did their research on their on what they wanted to add. And not like that they didn't do it last year, but they had less spots to fill this year. They had freshmen coming in and they had 4 guys returning that they knew. This year, they got very, very particular with what they wanted to bring in. What Rick Pitino said he was trying to do, and they landed Deivon Smith and Kadary Richmond in back-to-back days. So a very exciting week when that happened. But what he was trying to do, and what I thought he was trying to emulate, was recreate his 2-guard approach that he has had so much success with now. We saw that at Louisville, where he had Peyton Siva and Russ Smith. And then we saw it again at Iona when he had Wilcher Clayton and Danis Jenkins. Now, of course, Danis Jenkins followed him to St. John's, but there wasn't really that second guard that could have taken the load off of Danis at St. John's. For a little while, there was rumors that Wilcher Clayton was going to come with him. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But what they were able to do this offseason, adding Kadary Richmond, who has been a thorn in St. John's side for so long. In 5 games against St. John's, Kadary Richmond has averaged over 15 points per game, almost 10 rebounds per game, over 6 assists per game, and 3.2 steals per game. This guy's tormented St. John's, and I couldn't stand him until a few months ago. Now I love him. And, people that know St. John's and know the rivalry with Seton Hall, Seton Hall's had St. John's number for quite a while. And, me and a few buddies, we always go down to Jersey, we go down to the Prudential Center, and we've watched St. John's lose. And last year I was like, you know what? I've had enough. I'm never coming back to this building again to watch St. John's for Seton Hall. And then they landed Kadary Richmond, and I will be the first one in that building. It's a very exciting move. And, it wasn't one that was overly surprising. We kind of heard rumors that Kadary Richmond he's a local guy. He's from Brooklyn. So he wanted to stay close. His first school was Syracuse, that he's at Seton Hall. So he's always kind of been in the tri-state area. Yeah. The move is something that just makes so much sense. Rick Pitino said that Kadary Richmond is a jump shot away from being on the Knicks, basically saying that that's all that's stopping him from being in the NBA. Right. He has changed his jump shot a little bit this year. We've already started to see it. There's less of a hitch. He's working on that motion. And again, this is a guy that is so big at 6'6" that he can play the 1, 2, or 3. And when you pair that with Deivon Smith, who is 6 feet tall, but is probably the fastest player that has played at St. John's, maybe ever. And that is just such a lethal combination with the two of them, because Kadary is not that fast, but man, with a head of steam, who's stopping him? Yeah. And the other thing is that seems to be getting lost in the mix here is that Simeon Wilcher is still here. This is a player that's going into year 2 under Rick Pitino. Year 2 players are known to take that really big jump in general, but under Rick Pitino, that's going to be huge. And now you have 3 guys, a 6'4" point guard in Wilcher, a 6'6" point guard in Kadary Richmond, and a 6-foot speedster in Deivon Smith. This is a 3-headed monster that is the best backcourt in the Big East, and arguably one of the top 5 in the entire country. And it's so versatile that I think it's going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of teams, because who are you going to stop? And especially if they're going to be going very fast, which is something that I'm hearing that Rick Pitino is emphasizing in practice right now, is that they're trying to run. They're trying to run faster than they did last year, and they were a fast team last year. So this is going to be an up-tempo team, and it creates a very exciting amount of possibilities.
I'm glad you brought up Wilcher, because I think that part of the conversation for this team heading into next year is not necessarily just about the newcomers. Obviously, we talked about Kadary, we talked about Smith. There's 2 other guys coming in. Vincent Iwuchukwu comes over from USC, a mobile big, a rim protector type. You got Aaron Scott coming over from North Texas as well. But the returners, I think, are a huge part of this conversation for Pitino's team. And we talked about Wilcher a little bit already, but you also got a couple other younger guys coming back. Brady Dunlap's going to be back. Zuby Ejiofor is going to be back as well. And then you got RJ Lewis, who is the only guy returning who played a significant role last year. I know the other guys played, but Lewis I think he started the majority of the games, or at least he started a good chunk of the games last year. And so you kind of look at these 4 guys coming back into the mix, projecting a couple of them to kind of take that leap forward. How critical is that kind of group of returners? Because I think a lot of the attention for the St. John's team in the preseason has been and is going to continue to be all about the newcomers. It's going to be about the guards. It's going to be about even about Jaden Glover to an extent, the freshman coming in. But I feel like this, to me at least, this season is going to be made or not made based on how those 4 returners play.
I think what's so important about the 4 who are returning are in this transfer portal era where you see so many players leave and then you have to, really piece things together. You have guys who are now able to pass along what they've learned to the newcomers. And when you have newcomers who are older, like Kadary, like Aaron Scott, like Deivon Smith, and like Vince Iwuchukwu, you're hoping that the learning curve of learning a Rick Pitino offense isn't so great. Right. Simeon Wilcher learned a lot from Danis Jenkins. He now gets to teach Jaden Glover. He now gets to, teach Lefteris Leotopoulos, a high-end prospect coming over from Greece. Right. Zubi Ejiofor, who is friends with Vince Iwuchukwu, they grew up together, played AAU ball against each other. He now gets to kind of help him out. They practiced all summer together in Las Vegas. Ruben Prey, who's a 6'10 Portugal import, who there's a lot of buzz around him. This Zubi gets to kind of now mentor these guys, and Zubi Ejiofor is somebody who I think is going to take a quantum leap this year. Yeah. I'm really excited for his game. So the guys coming back, Brady Dunlap grew an inch this offseason, put on 22 pounds, which was something that Rick Pitino told him he's got to do because he wants to stay on the court, can't get muscle, can't get beat. He's got to stay on the court. So he put on some weight. These guys are learning what it's going to take. And the biggest thing, RJ Luis, like you mentioned, had a huge role last year. Well, he was also hurt. He had shin splints and he got surgery on both of his shins this offseason. That's all cleared up. He was at an event yesterday for Louis Carnesecca. He said he's 100%. He's ready to go. And for somebody that was averaging like 11-7 last season, now that he's not hurt and he can play free, I think is really exciting, could unlock him. I wouldn't be surprised if he leads the team in scoring, honestly. I know Kadary is the easy guy to say, but RJ Luis, healthy, is a very, kind of dark horse possibility to lead the team in scoring. He's a dynamic player. He's got to make the right decisions with the ball. Sometimes he played a little too fast last year, but he's somebody that's really exciting. And so I do think that the returning guys are really exciting. And Simeon Wilcher might be the most exciting one of the bunch. He's been putting 3-a-days in this summer. He's somebody that can really shoot the ball. He could get, he's that combo point guard that can play the 1 and the 2. And, I think that he is going to allow for them to space the floor a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Rick Pitino start 3 guards. And again, these guys, I think St. John's is really at their top 7 players is really exciting. And then you got some question marks about who's going to fill it out. But it is a very exciting roster. It is a better roster than last year, and the possibilities are really endless. And it's exciting right now. It's kind of hard. You got to kind of stop yourself because we're scorned and we've been hurt so many times. But this is a very exciting roster right now, and there's a year 2 Rick Pitino narrative at play. Anytime that Rick Pitino has taken a year 2 team, they have always done better. He took Providence to the Final Four. Kentucky won the SEC. Boston College BU did really well in year 2. Iona won 25 games in year 2. So St. John's year 2 under Rick Pitino, that's going to be a real storyline this year.
Well, you led into it perfectly, but I want to talk some starting lineup projections for this team, as well as talking a little bit about how we think this team's going to do. We'll talk about their schedule. You mentioned some of the marquee games on that calendar, how that might help them out this year. And then we'll talk some Big East, how we think this team's actually going to do. Not only does this team feel like they're improved, but some of the other teams maybe aren't going to be quite at the same level we've seen from them in the past. And so we're going to talk about all that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you all about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a huge return from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, if you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And folks, why not head to FanDuel right now? Dave got you all pumped up about this St. John's team. Right now, they are at plus 550 odds to win the Big East championship. It has the third best odds in the Big East. Of course, UConn is first at plus 125. Creighton is next at plus 380. And we're going to talk about both those teams and maybe why you should be putting that $5 down on Rick Pitino in year 2. Folks, head to FanDuel.com now to get started. America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3, still talking St. John's basketball here in our team preview series as we get closer and closer to the start of the college basketball season. We kind of touched a little bit on what we're thinking that starting lineup is going to look like, but Dave, I'm curious to hear, I kind of got a good sense of what the backcourt's going to look like in particular, but I'm curious who you think is going to start in that front court. It feels like Pitino's got quite a few options to potentially formulate a starting lineup, whether it's multiple guards, whether it's a more traditional starting lineup. It feels like there's a lot of options. You got a sense of how you think this is going to play out?
There's only a few things that are certain right now as far as the starting lineup. Kadary Richmond is going to be starting at one of the guard spots, and I think Deivon Smith is going to be starting at point guard. I think Zuby Ejiofor is the starting center. The other two positions are kind of up for grabs. If St. John's does go 3 guards, and Rick Pitino has alluded to it. He said that Simeon Wilcher has been the most improved player this summer, and he's been the best scorer this summer. So that alludes to possibly playing 3 guards. Now, if you do play 3 guards, what do you do at the 4 spot? Do you go with RJ Luis, who is obviously 100%, but is recovering? Do you want to kind of put him into that spot? Or do you go with Aaron Scott, the transfer from North Texas, 6'7", who's really good on defense and can really shoot the 3 shot almost 38% last year? According to my sources, he has been one of the most impressive two-way players, and Rick Pitino and the staff are absolutely over the moon about him. So I think it's going to be one of those 2 options. I personally, for a fun factor, would like to see the 3 guards with RJ Luis and then Zuby Ejiofor. Then you got, you kind of look at what's going to happen off the bench. Well, then that means that Aaron Scott's your first man off the bench, most likely. Jaden Glover is a dynamic freshman. We'll see how many minutes he's going to be able to get, but he's somebody that can really shoot it. And then you start looking at, does Ruben Prey, has he learned enough defense to really get on the court? He's a guy that's 6'10", has been talking about that, he's potentially an NBA player. Lefteris Leotopoulos is a 6'5" big guard who's been playing with adults for a long time over in Europe. He just had a tremendous showing at the U18 FIBA overseas. But as far as the starting lineup, again, it's RJ Luis or Aaron Scott at the 4, or you have the option of going really big in Deivon Smith, Kadary Richmond, RJ Luis, Aaron Scott, and Zuby Ejiofor, and then you bring Simeon Wilcher as your first scoring guard off the bench. It's going to be interesting. Rick Pitino doesn't put too much emphasis on who he wants to start. It's more about kind of who finishes, who plays in crunch times, but I know everybody wants to know about starting lineups. So that's kind of where I'm at. You got 2 spots that are pretty locked in Kadary, Deivon at the guards. I think Zuby is locked in at the 5 spot, and with Vinci Nwachukwu coming in to back him up. And then those other 2 spots are up for grabs. But right now, I'd put my money on Wilcher starting and then probably RJ Luis with Aaron Scott first off the bench.
It's one of those things where not exactly knowing who's going to start before the season is either a really good thing or a really bad thing. Typically, it can go either way, but in this case, I think it's a good thing. This is a team that's got a lot of depth and a lot of options, and Pitino's certainly not afraid to mix and match and find whatever works for him. So, wanted to move on and talk about the schedule. Again, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I do think there was a conscious effort by this team to put together a schedule that's going to help them, maybe more so than last year's schedule did in the non-conference slate in terms of getting attention from the committee when they're putting together the selection for the NCAA tournament. We talked about the schedule. We talked about New Mexico, Kansas State. Those are both home games for Pitino's team, obviously playing his son, Richard Pitino, over at New Mexico. That'll be very fun. The rest of their home games are kind of the traditional bye games that you see. You got some pretty good team. And Delaware's a good team. Fordham, you got Quinnipiac, Wagner, Harvard. Always fun to play them. They've been quite solid in the Ivy League for a while. And then Queens. And then you mentioned the neutral site. They got Baylor and they got either Tennessee or Virginia. Either way, that's going to be a really nice game. I'm guessing that Tennessee is going to be a little better than Virginia, but I think Virginia is going to be improved from where they were last year. And then, as you mentioned, Georgia, I think is going to be a little improved as well. No road games. That's becoming more common. I'm not going to pick on Pitino for that because most power teams are not playing any or very few true road games. As a college basketball purist, old head type, I wish we saw more road games in the non-conference slate. But this schedule, especially compared to last year, I think you're absolutely right. It feels like it's going to set them up more, not only to be a better team just because of higher quality competition, but put together a resume that's less likely to leave them on the outs, assuming they do well in Big East play.
Yeah, the non-conference schedule, I think, really shapes out to be a lot better than years past. What's good is that those 6 bye games aren't those, 330 net bye games. You're not playing your Mississippi Valley States or Central Connecticut's. You got teams that are not horrendous and that might actually do pretty well in their conferences.
Right.
So that should help a little bit. But
yeah,
everything boils down to those 5 big games.
Yeah.
And it's, if you can get 3 of them, I think you're good. Anything more than that, and you're in amazing shape, because I think all 5 of those teams are going to be top 60 in the net. And I think that's generous. I wouldn't be surprised if they're top 50, because I think Kansas State's going to be really good, and St. John's is playing them in Queens and not Madison Square Garden. That's a big advantage for St. John's. Playing New Mexico, always a good team. But if Rick Pitino, if he's going to lose to his son, ain't happening. So that's going to be a personal game.
Yeah.
But again, and then they're in Bahamas for the Baha Mar Hoops Classic. I'll be there with a lot of St. John's fans. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah.
Baylor, top 10 team in the country. I don't think you expect to win that game, but that's going to be a fun one. Tennessee or Virginia, either way, like you said, really important game, really tough. And then Georgia. I think if you get 3 of those, you're really excited. 4, I think if you get 4, you're ranked before Big East play for sure. And 5, I mean, you could catch me on the news streaking down 42nd Street.
Let's talk about getting into conference play. Obviously, I think you're absolutely right about kind of where they could potentially finish in that non-conference slate. That Baylor game is going to be really tough. All the other ones, they're all winnable. Will they win them all? We'll see. But when they get into conference play, you're talking about a conference that pretty much has been dominated by, it's been dominated by UConn in the national narrative, but the 3 teams that have really been at the top of the Big East for the last couple of years in the post-Jay Wright era at Villanova have been UConn, Creighton, and Marquette. And this year, UConn and Creighton are projected by most media outlets to be the top 2 teams in the conference, but we're starting to see St. John's be more in that conversation as the 3rd team. Sometimes it's Marquette, sometimes it's St. John's. I've also seen a few places that have Xavier slipping all the way up into that conversation there. There's less it's not a 3-headed monster as much anymore. I'm not somebody who's going to bet against Shaka Smart. I know they lost 2 NBA players in Oso Ighodaro and Tyler Kolek. I know that's why they've dipped down a little bit. They didn't use the transfer portal because Shaka Smart doesn't want to use the transfer portal. I also think UConn is down from last year. Now, I thought that after their first championship run, so I don't want to get too overconfident about that. As somebody who's seen Aiden Mahaney a lot, I think that there's a lot of excitement about him in stores, whereas I'm a little bit skeptical of how he fits just in terms of very different systems, but he's a very talented player. So we'll see how that goes for Danny Hurley's team. But looking at the Big East as a whole and looking at what St. John's has done this offseason, I know there's a lot of excitement about this roster. How do you kind of see them fitting in? We know the year 2 Pitino narrative is there. Is this a situation where this team can, go finish first in the Big East or finish top 2 in the Big East, or kind of how do you think that plays out?
Top 2 in the Big East, I think, is a tall task. To me, UConn gets the benefit of the doubt regardless. They're national champs back to back. They go to the top regardless if they're down, because UConn being down is like 5th in the country.
Right.
Creighton, in my opinion, had a really good offseason there. Getting Ryan Kalkbrenner back was huge, and I think they did really well in the portal as well. They're my number 2. Everything else is really up for grabs between like 3 and 7, in my opinion. Marquette probably slots into 3 because, like you said, I give Shaka the benefit of the doubt, but they did nothing to replace Oso or Tyler Kolek. That's a problem. You're asking for a lot out of guys who were never in that kind of a role before. And yeah, Cam Jones is great, but everybody else, like it's question marks. Ben Gold, solid player. How can he do it? Joplin, solid player. Can he do it? I think it's asking for a lot. Would it surprise me if Marquette finishes 3? No, but it wouldn't surprise me if Marquette finishes 6 or 7, honestly, because I think you're just asking for a lot. And, I was at Big East Media Day. Shaka Smart said, listen, it is just our philosophy. We don't really believe in the transfer portal. We want to build through our farm system kind of an outlook. And I just think that that's not really the way that it works anymore. And, Marquette, listen, Shaka Smart's a lot smarter basketball than me, and he knows what he's doing, but it's kind of hard when you're trying to replace 2 massive players like that, and you don't bring anything in. As far as St. John's kind of creeping into that spot, I think that, that's the hope, especially in year 2. I think this roster is super talented and could get there. Xavier is, I think, right there. We saw Sean Miller be so fed up with his team towards the end of last season that it didn't surprise me that they kind of cleaned house and brought in so many talented transfers. And obviously the big story is Jerome Hunter and Fremantle being back. So I really think that St. John's and Xavier are going to be fighting for that 3-4 spot. Providence is right there. I think they had a really good offseason, but I think Providence is going to be kind of like St. John's last year, where they have so many new faces that it's going to take a while to gel. Now, I love Kim English. I think he's a great coach. I think he's got the attitude, and the way that he has his players buying in is awesome. So it wouldn't surprise me if they have a great season. But I think that they are going to have to prove it a little bit. And that's kind of how my 1 through 6 shakes out. But like I said, 3 to 7 is really up for grabs, and St. John's finishing 3rd would be, man, amazing. And that's kind of I think that the way that their schedule kind of breaks, especially early on, I think I can see a floor of 12 Big East wins, and I can see 14 if everything breaks right. And 14 wins in the Big East is pretty much 2nd or 3rd. So traditionally.
Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. We really appreciate having your expertise here to talk St. John's basketball. Always love getting a chance to hear from people who are really plugged into these various programs as we get kind of going through our team preview series here. So thank you again, folks. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We will be back more this week, more team previews, more conference previews, all sorts of stuff, previews as we are into October, 1 month away from the start of the college basketball season. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, peace out.